Back from his self-imposed exile.
It's good to be back.
I've been thinking about sitting in this seat. You all must have reflected on the fact that had it not been for the unpleasantness at the theater, Abraham Lincoln would be 206 tomorrow. There's a story that's attributed to Lincoln about a man in a western town who violated some local standard and was sentenced to be ridden out of town on a rail. And some years later, someone asked him what he thought about the experience, and he said, well, if it hadn't been for the honor, I'd just as soon have walked. If it wasn't for the honor, I'd just as soon be back in my usual seat, kibitzing with Commissioner Lewis. But you have paid me the honor, so here I am, and I will do my best. You have the agenda for this evening. The minutes of January 4th. Are there any additions or corrections to be made to those minutes? If no one else has any, I have a couple. I believe at the last meeting, we began by electing Commissioner Peters as chair pro tem. Since we did not have a chair at that time, that needs to be added to the minutes. And I doubt, under the election of the chair on page 4, it indicates that Commissioner Updike seconded the motion. I don't think that could be the case. So we need to figure out, again, who did second the motion and correct the minutes. I think that's all I've got. If there's nothing else, a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
I motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Moved Lewis.
I'll second.
Seconded Schuer. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. The minutes are approved. We now have, under new business, 3 text amendments and 1 map amendment. I think there are public here to speak on the Dempster, Maine overlay district. Yes? Okay. Is there anyone here to speak on the personal service establishments amendment? Or on the fence regulations amendment? Okay, well, this is convenient. Then we can deal with the one that the public cares about first. These have been noticed for public hearing. The procedure we will follow then will be this. In all 3 cases, I believe staff is the applicant.
Correct.
So staff will make a presentation of the proposed amendments. We will allow for questions of staff from the commission if those are needed for clarification. When staff completes its comments, we will ask for any public comments. We will follow that with questions if there are any for the public. At that point, we will close the formal proceedings and proceed to commission deliberation on the amendments. If you expect to speak, or if you think you may be called upon to speak, I will swear you as witnesses. If you raise your right hand, please. Promise that the testimony you will give this evening will be the truth. Say, I do. Thank you. Okay. Case number 14, PLND 0045, zoning ordinance map and text amendment with respect to the proposed Dempster, Maine overlay district. Damir?
Thank you, Chairman Ford. It's going to take me some time to get used to saying Chairman Ford and not Chairman Peters, but we'll work on that. So the first case tonight is the proposed zoning ordinance and text and map amendment for the Dempster, Maine overlay district. Just to refresh everybody's memory, this project sort of started in May of last year, went through the Plan Commission a couple times and Zoning Committee, and ultimately in November of last year, the Plan Commission did recommend approval of the proposal to allow office and financial institution uses on ground floors within the Dempster Street and Main Street Business District as special use. Currently, they're allowed as permitted use, so the idea was to allow them as a special use only on the ground floor, and then on the upper floors, it would remain to be allowed as a permitted use. However, the commission did recommend that that be allowed through an adoption of a new overlay district. The idea was that the overlay district is indicated on the zoning map as well as in the text of the zoning ordinance. So that way a potential new user, a new office tenant could see right there on the map that there are special regulations that affect that particular area they're interested in. So we proceeded with the overlay district regulations, and that required us to renotice and republish the case. We had to notify all property owners that are affected by the two overlay districts along Dempster and Main, and therefore we had to present the case again here tonight at the Plan Commission. There are no changes to the proposal whatsoever. The Dempster Street area of the overlay district would stretch as before from the Elmwood Avenue on the west to the north-south alley just east of Chicago Avenue, and it would affect all properties with frontage along Dempster Street. And that's indicated here on the map. And then for the Main Street area, the same thing, no changes to the proposal. The overlay district would affect properties with frontage along Main Street from Elmwood Avenue on the west and Hinman Avenue on the east. This is just a summary of the proposed regulations. They're really simple. The draft ordinance is in the packet. The slide indicates the current regulations on the left, office, both ground floor and above ground floor, and then the financial institution, ground floor and above ground floor. They're all allowed in the same manner as permitted uses. On the right-hand side, is the indication of what we're proposing, and that's that the ground floor office and financial institution uses would be allowed as special use, and then on the upper floors would remain as permitted use. All other uses would remain to be allowed in the same manner as they are currently, so there's no other changes to these areas. We do believe the standards for approval have been satisfied. There are 4 standards that regulate all text and map amendments. The first one is in regards to the compliance with the comprehensive general plan. We do believe that this proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the idea to assure neighborhood business districts remain for retail uses, and that new uses are consistent with the existing uses in the neighborhood character of the area. We also believe that there will be no adverse effect to surrounding property owners and the other uses in the district. This would apply uniformly to all properties that front on Dempster or Main Street within the overlay districts. And then as we address individual uses through the special use approval process, we can assure that adequate public facilities and services are appropriate and available in that area wherever the special use is proposed. So with that, staff recommends approval, and I would entertain any questions.
Questions for staff?
Let me ask you, why did you put a description in the text ordinance instead of relying on the map to locate the district? Let me try a microphone. Why did you put a description of the location in the text ordinance instead of relying on a map to show the location?
Do you mean the definition of the boundaries of the overlay district, or?
Well, you have 2 ordinances with the same number in the packet. So I assume that might be one ordinance. And they show, just as the map you had up, the location of the district. And then in the purpose clause, there is a recital of the location of the district, which doesn't entirely correspond to the location of the district. But it seems to me it's unnecessary to have the location in the purpose clause and in, because the map is a much clearer indicator, along with the list of real estate index numbers.
Do you have anything to add,
No, sir.
Counselor?
So in drafting the ordinance, Demir and I worked together and saw what other municipalities have done as well as what we've done previously. Purpose statements are used to clarify. That's something that we can modify if we choose to.
If you choose to leave it there, then I suggest it be reworded,
Okay.
because actually particularly Dempster doesn't center on the station. The station is indeed not located on Dempster.
Okay.
But I thought it was unnecessary since you have the PI numbers and the purpose can be reference to neighborhood commercial of this type rather than a location.
So essentially, the map does cover the region, and I would agree with that. We can modify the purpose statement to reflect said change. And Demir and I can work on that.
That'd be great. Small technical question.
Merely. Commissioner Sorrow.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that's raised, but it's probably important to have both, only because if there happens to be any PIN divisions or any changes in the future, and especially if they're on the boundary, there may be some question as to what is or is not included.
I would think that would be handled by the attached map. Because the purpose clause is not accurate. And it doesn't give you an idea of the boundaries.
Right. Well, I mean, to that extent. That's
So
what maybe if both coincide.
It looks to me like a map and PIN numbers would be much more clear
I agree.
than a purpose statement saying the area around the Dempster Street station on Dempster Street. Main Street, similar description, the station is on Chicago Avenue.
Counselor, you've got what you need.
Just, I would like a point of clarification from the commission. We can essentially remove that in its entirety, or we can leave the language so broad that it covers the region. I see Commissioner Assaro's point, having it covered both ways. We can do either or, whatever the preference of the commission would be at this point.
If you're going to leave the purpose statement in, then I think you have to have all the boundaries.
We do have purpose statements for all of the overlay districts, so that's something that I would.
I'm not objecting to a purpose statement. I'm saying if you locate it with a purpose statement, then you need accurate boundaries.
So we can work on that.
Which we
we'll
don't have
modify
in
the
this.
boundaries on that.
Well, I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but is the only description in the purpose statement? Or is there a description also in the body of the ordinance?
In the second ordinance, there is a map, which is incorporated into the ordinance, that shows the, can you put the map up? That shows the location, very, I think, pretty clearly,
Okay.
and it has, I believe, addresses. And,
That's Main Street, isn't it?
and then there's a list of PIN numbers.
Right. The idea of the purpose statement, as Mario had indicated, it was to be consistent with other overlay districts. Because we're introducing specific regulations in this particular area, the purpose statement sort of justifies why there are specific regulations for that particular area.
Well, I'm not objecting to a purpose
Right.
statement that does that, but
Commissioner Peters, frame an amendment, and let's
shows-
come back and pick it up when we come to vote.
if it shows the location, then it needs to be more accurate. I will take a look at the text.
We can define it exactly as it's outlined in the map, so.
Any other comments or questions?
Where's the purpose statement
In the first of the two ordinances.
in the first ordinance?
Yeah.
In the whereas?
Yeah, and did you intend the ordinances to have the same number?
The ordinances have different numbers. The ordinance with the text is 20015. The purpose statement that Commissioner Peters is referring to is in section 2, 615.17.1 purpose statement. The second ordinance is 25015, and that's amending the zoning map. And that has exhibits that delineate the actual boundaries of the overlay districts and all the PIN numbers that are encompassed by said boundaries.
You know, we've gotten kind of deep into this discussion while we were still on public hearing mode. I'm going to suggest that we back up here and let the public speak its piece, and then we can come back in discussion and try to sort this out, and in the meantime, maybe Peters will get his amendment drafted. So, from the public, Ms. Nyden, do you want to speak?
Good evening. Johanna Nyden, Economic Development Manager with the City Manager's Office here. I'm here to answer any questions as regards to the economic development aspects of this overlay district. This began a year ago. We work very closely with the businesses. We're a staff of 4. We work very closely with the merchants in the Dempster and the Main Street area, as well as all the other merchants throughout Evanston. And this really came from the merchants, the need to help regulate and manage what comes into our business districts. We've come out of a recession. We're doing really well in Evanston. We have a lot of interest in a lot of properties, and we don't always have the most productive and positive interest in certain properties. A good example on Main Street is the former Toys Etc. space in the 700 block. And we had a number of users, the city staff people come and say, I want to open a business. Where can I do this? And we said, Toys Etc. space, go check that out. Great retailers. We had a furniture store, a children's clothing store. They all went, and the property owner wanted a very significantly higher rent that was probably more reflective of what you'd get from a medical office or an attorney's office. And we just couldn't get a retailer in there. So fast forward to now, we are going to get a retailer in there. Dave's Rock Shop is moving across the street. But one of the challenges, and Sean from Goods will speak to this, is when you have certain services in a district, you don't necessarily get the foot traffic that's always positive for district. There's certain office uses that I think most merchant districts want because it creates foot traffic. People have to kill time before an appointment, so they're going to maybe go shop in stores. So there's a healthy balance to those things. But our merchants are saying that help us manage what comes in, because sometimes these uses aren't necessarily the best for our business district. We do a lot of programs. I don't know if Demir has touched on this in previous meetings. We do a lot of things to help support retailers and help bridge the gap to what is sometimes challenging for bringing retailers in. We do a facade improvement program. We match 50-50. And we're actually going to start a storefront modernization program, hopefully later this year, where we will help retailers build out spaces, because we know that sometimes retailers need extra dollars to build out interiors of spaces. So that's just a little overview of what we do, and I'm really here to also emphasize that the merchants really, really do want this, and I think a lot of the other business districts who do provide services already want to be able to have the other uses managed, not just for friendly competition purposes, but because they don't want to be on a row of service, bank, attorney, like all the attorneys up here, bank, attorney, and insurance agent, but they want to be in a business district, in a retail district, because that's the attractiveness of putting their own office there. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Questions for Ms. Nyden? Thank you. Is it Mr. Price? I'm sorry.
Good evening. I'm Sean Chinsky, the owner of Goods Fine Picture Framing. We're at 714 Main Street. I also own the building that we're in, which is from 710 to 716 Main Street. I've been involved with our store for pretty much my entire life in one facet or another, so I've seen how Main Street has evolved over the years. There's a letter in the packet that I wrote about this topic back in June, and I've spoken with some of you previously, so hopefully I'm not belaboring the point, but this is a very important issue to me, so I appreciate your consideration of it. I believe that a shopping district is only as strong as the collective offerings of the businesses that are there, and while attorneys' offices and accountants add traffic to the neighborhood, when they're situated amongst stores, it diminishes the appeal to go to a neighborhood and to shop. So I certainly want those businesses in our area. They make great second floor tenants. If you look around our area and you look at the streets that are off of Main Street, like Custer, for example, used to have retail businesses, and once that sort of dropped off and offices opened up, that became a dead zone. And there's other areas kind of on the periphery of my block where I am on Main Street. Really, our retail core has shrunk to our block being healthy and the block on the other side of Chicago Avenue. And if we don't stop it from shrinking, really we're going to turn into an area that is not very appealing for retailers. So I feel it's really vital that we keep office use out of what should be retail spaces. So again, I thank you for your consideration. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions? Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Did you also wish to speak on this issue?
No, you answered my question.
Ah, okay. Then, if there is nothing else from the public and no questions from the public for the proponents, we will close the hearing record and come back to discussion. Is that your light, Peters?
My line,
Thank you.
no matter what it says on the board. I support this change. This is my immediate neighborhood, and I agree with the testimony and think it's really important to try and revitalize this area. It is slowly changing and losing the retail, and every time non-retail, such as banks, go in, there is less pedestrian traffic for retail people, retail shoppers, and I think it's really a good move. Both Dempster Street, which is 2 blocks from me, and Main Street, which is 6 blocks. Important proposal, and I think it will help a lot.
I got to get used to whose names are whose. Commissioner Sorrow.
Yes, I think it's a great idea. I'm in support of it. Anecdotally, I think it was probably, I think just before the winter, I was walking down Main Street, and I was actually killing some time doing something else. And it was a Saturday, and it was an afternoon, and I walked by, and I noticed the Corrado cutlery, and I was like, oh, that rang a bell. And I looked inside, and because I remember the Corrado Cutlery downtown used to be around the corner from my office. I used to be at 111 West Washington, and it was around the corner on Clark Street. And I would go there because they would have sort of, different specialized things for men, like shaving stuff and everything else, and knives and all that stuff. So I stopped in, and I just started having a conversation with the owner. I forgot his name, but I recognize him. And so we just started talking, and he said, he had moved up here and everything else, moved his business. And so it was interesting because he shared with me that he, said that, they're trying to basically get together as a group to try to spur more, foot traffic and just try to get more activity and other similar types of businesses to feed off the demand. And his store looked great. I just don't think most people, would even know about it. And I just stumbled across it because I happened to be walking, or like I said, killing some time to go in somewhere else. But I think more, retail type of, uses in there to get more foot traffic, I think would definitely be a huge benefit. So I'm in support of it, for all of you. And, I think it's a really good idea. Good work.
Commissioner Lewis, I stepped on you earlier.
So I just really have a question for staff. In your analysis, you talked about 4 points that would, for the non-conforming uses, and you said, if a structure that is currently occupied by a non-conforming office or financial institution becomes vacant for more than a year, the structure can then be occupied only by conforming use, which includes office and financial institutions that receive special use approval. So I guess my question is if there is an immediate succession by a similar use, is that not excluded? I mean, so if there's a non-conforming use there, and so a bank wants to be replaced by another bank, somehow is that addressed? They should become a special use. Is that not correct? If you can't just transfer.
As long as that exchange happens within a year, that the space is not vacant for more than a year, then it's permitted, they can go without the need for special use. If, however, the space is vacant for more than a year, that nonconformity is lost, and then the new use has to come in and get a special use. That's right.
Okay, so if they immediately are succeeded by a bank for a bank, then there's no special use there, a conforming use.
Commissioner Lewis,
So
just
the-
to clear, this
I'm
is
sorry.
more.
Go ahead.
This is just to clarify, that's consistent with the city code in general, and that does apply to any sort of special use whenever these changes kind of happen. As long as it happens within a year, then it's acceptable.
So that the nonconforming use is an attribute of the structure, not the resident, the occupant. Okay. Any other comments or questions? And I think we still have Commissioner Peters' concern about wording in the purpose statement.
I would like to make a motion that we adopt both ordinances, identical to the proposal, but delete the word centered around from the purpose statement and substitute the word near.
Is there a second to that motion?
Seconded.
Staff, does that amendment work?
And that's perfect, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? The motion then is to recommend to the council that it adopt the text and map amendments as presented by staff with the amendment noted by Commissioner Peters. All in favor? Let's roll call this one, since it's going to council.
Commissioner Peters,
Aye.
Commissioner Scher,
Aye.
Commissioner Asaro,
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin,
Aye.
Commissioner Goddard,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis, Chairman Ford,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations. Where are we? Plan Commission Case 15, PLND 0008, zoning ordinance text amendment for personal service establishments. Staff are recommending that we send this to zoning committee. They have some additional research that they want to do, as I understand it, and this will give them a chance to do it. That meeting would be scheduled for March 18th, the Wednesday after our regular March meeting. Since it's been noticed for hearing for tonight, I think we want to continue it, and that continuation would be to the regular April meeting. Demir, anything more we need to say about that?
No, that's exactly what it is. I think we've published a notice a little bit prematurely. We did not get enough chance to research the particular text amendment with some similar communities and just in town, trying to keep track of all the personal service establishments. So we felt that it would be appropriate to just ask for continuance and then allow staff for a little bit more time, and also maybe send it to the zoning committee for just a review of the proposal before it's presented to the Plan Commission.
I have a motion.
Go.
I move that this matter be continued to the regularly scheduled April meeting of the Plan Commission, and that it be referred to the zoning committee for hearing and comment. And do we have a date for that?
March 18th. I
On
think it
March
is.
18th, with the committee to report back to the commission prior to our April meeting.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Dubin seconds. Any discussion? Permission to use the last roll call? Hearing no objection, we'll apply the unanimous roll call. Then, Plan Commission Case 15, PLND 0009, a zoning ordinance text amendment with respect to fence regulations. Again, the staff are the applicants, so Demir, take us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to summarize the staff's report that was in the packet, there's two components to this proposed text amendment. One is regarding the fence regulations, and the other one is in regards to introducing some regulations for the invisible pet fences. So the first part, staff is basically recommending to allow fences up to 6 feet high and solid fences in the required street side yards, which are 15 feet off of the side or street side property line. And then the second part regarding the invisible pet fences, we're proposing to define invisible pet fence and then define the regulations to allow pet fences within the front yards and street side yards with a 6-foot setback, and then to allow them in the side and rear yards with no setback requirement. So in regards to fences, fence regulations, currently on a typical residential lot, the required street side yard is 15 feet. So fences are currently not allowed in the street side yards within that first 15 feet off of the side lot line. So this slide indicates sort of a corner property, one street, which is the front of the lot, the side street. This would be the residence, and then this would be the lot line. So this kind of indicates how the fence is currently allowed. You can put it in the rear yard, and then it has to be offset by 15 feet from the lot line here. And the intent was to have that sort of in line with the house. And then it does have to be 3 feet off of the front of the home. However, Evanston is a mature community, and so most of the existing housing stock is sort of non-conforming. It doesn't really comply with the current setbacks. So what you see typically is something like this, where a single-family home or any kind of a structure, I suppose, does not necessarily meet that 15-foot setback. This one in particular is offset about 5 feet. So that 15-foot requirement would put this type of fence basically in the middle of the rear yard. And it's simply an inconvenience for the property owners, and that's why we see a lot of zoning variances. And just to point out, they're always approved. There's never any opposition. They're approved as or considered as minor variances, which means we have to notify the surrounding property owners within 250 feet. And, in 2013, out of the 15 variations that we received for these side yard or street side yard fences, all 15 have been accepted and approved. And then in 2014, we had 16 these variances, and all of them have been approved. Now, during the review process, we have determined that there are a couple things that need to be addressed, and that's the distance off of the sidewalk that usually runs along that side property line, and then also the visibility of the site triangle between the driveway and the public sidewalk. So this is in essence, the proposal. What we're suggesting is that the fence regulations would clarify that you can do a fence in the street side yard that would go basically 2 feet off of the lot line to allow for landscaping. This is something that we've seen all property owners that have applied for a variance. They have no objection to it whatsoever. And we feel that it does beautify that sort of the walkway experience along the sidewalk, so that you don't have the fence right up against the sidewalk. And then consistent with the current regulations in the regular side yard, the proposal is to require that fence to be offset about 3 feet from the front of the home. And in regards to the site triangle, the provision we're suggesting be included. So currently, there is a site triangle requirement that applies when a street and an alley and street intersect. So then you can, there's a 20, in this case, if it's an alley and a street or street and street, within 20 feet of the intersection, you can only do a certain type of fence that's indicated here in the diagram. That would be a 2.5-foot high fence, and you can do any kind of a fence, solid or open. Similarly, when there's two alleys adjacent to each other, if this is a lot and this is, let's say, rear lot line, side lot line, if somebody wants to do a fence along these two property lines, they have to offset it 3 feet or reduce the fence within this triangle to a 2.5-foot high fence, so that vehicles that are accessing the alleys have the ability to see cross traffic. So in line with that, what we're suggesting, if we're going to allow fences in the street side yards, this is an example of a potential street side yard. This is a diagram that was in the packet. If this is a street and then this is a side street, and there's a single-family home with an attached garage, there's a driveway that leads off into the street. We're proposing that a site distance triangle of 8 feet that's measured from the intersection of the driveway and the property line, so 8 feet by 8 feet. Within that site triangle, if somebody wants to do a fence, they would have to drop it down to 4 feet. and then maximum opacity, or, the fence cannot be solid more than 70%, and then 30% would be open. So we feel that that is consistent with the current intent of the ordinance that allows for these types of fences, 4 feet high and 70% solid, in the front yards along type 1 streets. So the code allows for certain streets, the city council has adopted certain streets as sort of type 1 streets, where in the front yard you can actually do a fence, otherwise fences are not allowed in the front yards, but only those types of fences are currently allowed along those type 1 streets. So we feel that this provision to allow that type of fence within the site distance triangle is consistent with that. So that's in essence the proposal in regards to the fence regulations. And in regards to invisible pet fences,
Commissioner Sure, you got a question at this point?
Well, it's directly on this, but if he wants to finish, we can come back.
I can either way.
Okay. You probably noticed it, Tamir, but there are people, we have to make a distinction, or we may not have to make a distinction, but at least consider the difference between a solid fence and a homeowner that puts up some very tall bushes that grow over 6 feet and actually serve like a fence in that it gives them privacy on one side, and whether that's something that's going to fall under your regulations or not.
That's a good point. I'll just address that real quick, and I can also address it later on. Obviously, the city does allow people to install landscaping materials, and because current regulations do not allow these type of fences, we've seen people that have indeed tried installing hedges and other types of landscaping materials that in essence form a fence. Now, some of that may be attractive, but a lot of that may not be attractive. And we feel that a clear regulation in regards to fences that would require some landscaping materials sort of as what we call foundation planting on a house that's along the fence may look more appealing, and it would prevent potentially, it's a safety concern if somebody can hide in the bushes, et cetera. So we've seen that, and this was the idea to address that.
If I didn't cut my bushes down every year, they'd be up at 6 foot. I keep them down around 3 for my own pleasure. But so you can regulate them when they're put in, but if we don't have any follow-up, you're going to have those fences.
That is correct.
I don't know if it's enforceable at that point.
Yeah, the city does not currently enforce, we do have a property maintenance code where properties have to be kept up, but at which point we sort of interject when landscaping bushes seem overgrown. I don't have the answer to that, but it's certainly something that our code enforcement officers can address.
Carry on.
Okay, so I'll just switch over to invisible pet fence regulations. So basically, when the city was approached to introduce invisible pet fence regulations because there was a need for that. Because the current code is not really clear what happens. We do have a public safety code that requires pets to be restrained at all times when they're in a public way, in public parks, at beaches, etc. However, on private properties, the code is silent. So because we don't allow typical fences in front yards, unless you're along one of these type 1 streets, which are really rare, you cannot, technically, because you don't have a fence, your pets cannot run around freely in your front yard. And since we have a lot of homes that have a significant setback off of the street, that's a significant portion of the property that cannot be utilized for that. So there was a need to introduce something that at least we can put in the ordinance, and if people choose to install or not install, they have something to look as a regulation. So we decided to introduce something that would provide that clarity in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So the idea here is to introduce a setback along the front property lines, and then in the rear yards, you can install an invisible pet fence along the side and rear lot lines. And just to point out, the invisible pet fence can be anything from a wire that's buried underground, or we've seen where it's an element that's a sort of a point that has a a radius that emits sort of an electrical shock to the pets, et cetera. So either one of these would qualify as an invisible pet fence. And then so when we looked at how to regulate that, we decided to introduce a setback because of potential pets with their owners walking them on a leash down the sidewalk. We felt that pets that are, if somebody installs an invisible fence, there should be some sort of a setback so that the pet that is running freely in the front yard does not come across with the pet that's on a leash with the homeowner sort of walking down the sidewalk. And typically these leashes are about 5-6 feet that allow the pets to kind of run around. So we felt that a 6-foot setback for that may be appropriate, and that would apply to the front property line and then the property line along the side street. And then when you get into the side streets, obviously in the side and rear setback yards of the property, you can install a regular visible fence. So we feel that this particular proposal overall does meet the standards of approval. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4 standards of approval. The first one deals with the comprehensive plan, and we believe that this is consistent with that to assure that residents can enjoy their properties as it's intended, that the residential areas are allowed to change over time. This allowance to not allow fences in the front yards may not have been desired in the past, but clearly there's a lot of property owners that want to have fences in the side yards. Same thing with the invisible pet fences. That's something that's more of a recent phenomena that was actually introduced, that we've seen it across the city due to the effect that we do not allow front fences in the front yards. So we believe that that is consistent with the General Comprehensive Plan's objective to maintain the appealing character of the Evanston's neighborhoods. And we do not believe that it would be a detriment to the surrounding properties. Obviously, it would apply to all properties uniformly. And if it is installed properly and obeyed by, it should prevent conflicts between fence or pets that are on their properties without the homeowner, and then those that are on the sidewalk with the owner sort of walking them down the leash. And I believe the last standard is not applicable, even though I mentioned that it's satisfied. So in essence, without going into further ado, I believe there will be some questions, so I would open up the floor to questions that both Lori and myself can address. I know Lori has been working with our zoning office on these minor variances, and she can also answer some questions.
Am I correct that no one in the public wishes to speak on this one? You sure? Okay, Commissioner Short.
Okay, Demir, does the city require a permit to put in a buried dog fence?
Right now, we don't. And the proposal is to require that if they're planning to install it.
Do you think anybody will? The point I'm getting at is I like the idea, but I don't think anybody's going to tell you if they put it in, and they're in ground, so you'll never know it's there. And it seems like it's something you're putting on the books that is good, but it's just not going to go anywhere.
Well, I think if I can answer that question, and I'm not sure that I can, but I'll try. We certainly had a lot of hard time trying to determine what would be the appropriate way of addressing this. This came as a response to conflicts between pets. And what we've seen doing research that there are regulations for invisible pet fences in areas where they're a little bit more rural, where animals they tend to be running freely in their front yards, et cetera. Evanston is rather unique because we do not allow fences in the front yards, and that may allow people would suggest that people want to install some of these. And we felt that if we have regulations, we can at least fall back on that and say you have to follow this. If there's a conflict between a pet walking down the sidewalk and that owner and the owner of the property, and there's some dispute about, this pet that was running freely in the front yard came too close to the sidewalk, then there's a element there that the city can interject and say, well, we do have regulations, and here's what they should have followed. will most likely not work everywhere, and clearly not everybody will apply for it, but that's sort of our proposal, and we'll see how the council takes it.
Well, when you're walking a dog, and I don't own a dog, but we have a dog that's given to us every so often. There are leash laws. So when I'm walking the dog, and I imagine people are, they have to be on a leash, do they not?
Correct.
All right, so you have half of the equation taken care of. You've got the owner of that dog should be keeping them out of the yard. The buried fence, if I understand right, the dog wears a collar or something that gives him a little reminder, sometimes a big reminder that he's getting very close. But to have a homeowner, and Scott, you've had dogs, do you let your dog out unleashed in the front yard? I mean, I'm just trying to get more of a perspective here.
I have a 2-foot setback in my front yard, so the dog is not in the 2-foot front yard. But I wouldn't let the dog out without walking it anyway, and I don't let it out elsewhere. I am amazed at how many people will come up to a large, strange dog. Mostly I'm amazed at people with tiny little dogs that bring it up to play with my 140-pound dog, and the only way I can get them to stop is to say to my dog, because it doesn't do any good to say something to the owners usually, "Oh, dog, don't step on that little animal, you'll break its back." And then the owners pull back.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good idea. I would hate to have a large dog charging me up to the lot line when I'm walking my dog. And the electric fences, when the dog's excited and running toward the fence line, they don't always work.
I've got Commissioner Lewis, Commissioner Dubin, Commissioner Sorrow. Commissioner Goddard has been leaning toward her switch. Let's just start at this end and go this way.
Okay, well, so I think Demir mentioned that this is a safety issue, and I'm questioning if this is the means to enforce it, that it's putting burden on a property owner, it seems to me, to not fully enjoy their property, which is, and that the responsibility for someone walking a dog should be, if they see another dog, is to give space and give ground, in my opinion. So, and that the homeowner should have the right to enjoy their property. I even question if invisible fences are fences. It's a marketing name, I think, given by a company to sell something. And I would question that it's actually a fence and applicable to be under our jurisdiction even to use. So I guess those are my. I have many more comments, but people have been saying them. so I would yield to the next person.
Commissioner Dubin?
There are times when, even with your best intentions, a dog can pull an owner over or rush without the owner being able to grab the leash. And this certainly the setback would certainly make it harder for a dog within an electric fence to get, for the dog who's on a leash to get into the fenced-in area. On the other hand, it's not clear whose fault it would be, even if the owner had just been pulled off his or her feet. So I don't know what this regulation would do necessarily.
Commissioner Goddard?
Should voice my concern.
Okay.
This is actually pretty, it's interesting. I think it's definitely well-intentioned. I think that the proposal it doesn't on its face conflict with the requirement that dogs be on leashes, but it really kind of does. And it kind of ties into Commissioner Lewis's comment. I don't believe that this invisible fence actually falls under the definition of a fence under the zoning code. I haven't reviewed the definition of fence under the zoning code recently, but I'm fairly certain that a definition of a fence doesn't even fall within that. Invisible fence, if you want to attribute a description to it. So essentially the proposal is to regulate fences, but we're really not regulating a fence. We're essentially implementing regulation with regard to a particular technology. I just don't see how we have a rule that says dogs have to be on leashes, with the exception of, with this proposal, if it's your dog on your property within an invisible fence.
I don't think they have to be on leashes on private property,
No, they wouldn't.
Well,
only public property.
well, so as of right now, people can have their dogs, they can just open their front door and let their dogs run out, and,
If it knows not to go on public property,
well,
which usually
let's
means that
operate on
there's
the
a fenced
assumption,
yard,
true, but let's
not an
operate,
invisible fenced yard, but a regular fenced yard.
but let's operate on the assumption that the dog does not know where the property line is and when and if to stop.
They get a survey.
Okay.
Sorry.
But
I think, I've been charged by dogs and had them knock down fences when I'm walking by, both with and without my little puppies. And, I agree with you. This may not be a fence. This is not a fence.
Yeah, I don't think it's a fence under the zoning code.
And I agree that it's not going to be enforceable with respect to the first time the dog brushes the property line and bites someone. But with respect to the second time, that'll be quite enforceable.
Right. I don't think that this is, I think it's potentially could, in isolated instances, again, the number of people who are going to get an invisible fence, it's going to be probably the first issue. It may be a small population, but it would seem to me that if since we don't allow fences in the front yard, the natural inclination, and I would assume that the habit and custom of people who have dogs is to not let them run around in the front yard. And that's the reason why they probably don't let them run around the front yard, is because we don't allow fences. I think if someone has a dog and is deciding to move into Evanston, and they know that if they're going to buy a house or rent a house, and if they have a dog and they know that they're not going to be able to have their dog run around the front. So I don't think it's going to deter or make any difference to anybody who's looking to move to Evanston. They're not going to decide on Evanston because of the fence rule. So they're going to know that they can't let their dogs run around. If they have a backyard, and for properties that have extensive front yards, they probably have a backyard. So if they have a backyard, I guess I really don't see the point then, if you have a dog, why you'd have to let it out in the front yard with an invisible fence if you have a backyard that's already fenced. And hold on, let me just finish. So I think you're gonna run into some conflict and potential issues with dogs walking by or kids walking by, because and a dog being in a front yard potentially with an invisible fence for a variety of different reasons. And a neighbor may actually next door to the owner of that has the invisible fence, maybe doesn't want a dog running around in what appears to be an unsecure environment to the naked eye, but isn't. I just think that if you have a dog, if you got a backyard, you let your dog out in the backyard. I think that there's a reason why we have our fence rule regarding front yards, and I just think that this is essentially it would be eroding, that purpose, because what's the purpose of the fences in the front yard? What was the rationale for that? Because honestly, if I represent somebody, I'd argue, well, what's the difference if I have essentially an actual visible fence that is potentially much better than the invisible fence in terms of keeping my dog within it. If you're going to allow the invisible fence, then you should allow basically an actual patent fence. And you may not want to go down that road.
Mr. Updike, and then Lewis, and then, I don't know who.
Demir, could you describe the incident which prompted the request for this change?
You know, I do not have the details on that. I just, from what I understand, there was just I believe humans were involved. So unfortunately, we don't have the information, but it was definitely sent to us as there's a problem with both pets fighting, and there's been safety concern with the owners of those pets. So there's a suggestion that we should introduce regulations. Now, this is not a requirement for anybody to have a fence. I just want to clarify that. This is just introducing regulations that we can fall back on if somebody asks us, well, what is the requirement? What can I do? What should have somebody done? And we can say, well, these are the requirements. It doesn't require somebody to have an invisible pet fence in the front yard. And to answer a question about the fence, it is defined as a structure other than a building that is a barrier and used as a boundary or means of protection or confinement. That's the definition of a fence in the zoning ordinance.
I've got a lot of lights on here. I'm gonna invoke the rule of don't repeat yourselves, because I think we risk starting to repeat ourselves on this one. Unless someone's got a proposal for how to fix this one, I think let's get a few more comments, and then I want to come back and look at the side yard issue again.
I have a clarification.
Wait a minute. You're fifth in line at this point.
No clarification. That's fine.
We'll get to you. Lewis?
I have a clarification. So as it stands now, it's not that you can have invisible fences in your front yard and you can run them right up to the property line. They're unregulated.
Correct.
Clear? Yeah, okay, so you can have them anywhere you want to. You could have them 20 feet back on the property line. You could, anywhere.
Correct.
So this is just a means of regulating them
Correct.
at this point.
So that we have something that for those individuals that decide to come into the city and apply for a permit, that we can say it's 6 feet so that it does not end up being right up against the lot line, so that there is a conflict between the few instances when there's an animal running in the front yard and then somebody walking down. And it's not only for conflicts between pets, it's also a safety for pedestrians. You know, a lot of times they're not sure, what's going on. I found myself oftentimes walking or running down the sidewalk and an animal scares you running, so.
And you're, by reading the definition of a fence, you're implying that it qualifies as a barrier and a containment method as a fence under the ordinance.
And it's used to regulate nuisance from one property to the other.
But it's a structure.
Demir, if I can make a quick.
There's or, not and, I think, in that sentence. Is that right? Or is something?
I can read it again. And Counselor, you can continue then afterwards. A structure other than a building that is a barrier and used as a boundary or means of protection or confinement.
Structure.
Would you ask whether it applies?
And I'd like to also add, we are within the ordinance defining what an invisible pet fence is. And that's defined as an electronic system designed to keep a pet or other domestic animal within a set of predefined boundaries without the use of a visible barrier. So we're defining the invisible pet fence.
So you're creating a new category here. There are fences and there are invisible
Pet fences.
Commissioner Schuer.
Okay. Demir, I agree this may be a safety issue. Do we still have the animal control unit here in Evanston? And if so, I think we do. I would like to hear what they have to say. Because I think this may not be the vehicle to satisfy the safety concern. I'm off my horse.
I'm going to step in here. I have not heard in all of what's gone on here anyone raising any questions about the proposed side yard fence issue. Are there problems with the side yard proposal?
I would support it. And I'm really amazed because in the 10 years I sat on the zoning board, we'd get lots of people to speak against this kind of proposal.
Okay.
And it made no sense to me.
Then I would entertain a motion to recommend to the city council that it adopt the ordinance recommended by staff insofar as it deals with side yard fences. I want to split the question here. Do I have that motion?
So move.
Goddard, seconded?
Second.
Sure. Any discussion on that? Since this is going to council, let's call the roll.
All right, we have a motion to separate the two proposals of the text amendment regarding the regular fences and the invisible pet fences into two separate things. So Commissioner Goddard,
Aye.
Commissioner Scher,
Aye.
Commissioner Asaro,
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin,
Aye.
Commissioner Peters,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis.
Aye.
Chairman Ford.
Aye. All right, so the side yard fence proposal goes to council with a positive recommendation. Now, what do you want to do?
I want to ask a question.
Okay,
I think I've made that clear. You may not want to hear it.
no, I want to hear it.
I believe the problem with the dogs and the invisible fences is a problem of the backyard on corner lots, not a front yard problem. I have never seen a dog with an invisible or other fence in the front yard, except with the mansion's huge setback places. But in the backyard, the corner pets go into the corner side yard, and that's where I've had problems, both as a pedestrian and as a dog owner with a dog. I have been trying to get a clarification as to whether the invisible fence applies in the backyard where there's a corner lot, or if it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I think it's silly to go this route, because I don't think there's a front yard problem. But in the side yard, that is where I've had dogs come out.
Chairman,
Be vicious.
Commissioner Peters, to clarify, it does apply. It does apply to any property line abutting any public right-of-way or street line.
So the proposal is to have a 6-foot setback from a property line abutting a public right-of-way, front or street side yard, and then in the rear yards and side yards, it would be permitted along the lot line.
I would support that proposal, not because I think it's needed in the front yard, but I think it will be helpful in the side yard, so that people don't put an invisible fence coming right up to the sidewalk, and then the dog comes running toward the pedestrian, growling and carrying on, and stops just short. Of course, as a pedestrian, you don't know it's going to stop just short. It's scary.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Asaro.
Yes, sir. I forgot to add that I do like dogs. I don't have one, but I like them. But
Let the record show that.
right, I think that there's the invisible fence concept. I don't think works, because we have a definition of what a fence is, and again, I asked the question: what was the purpose and rationale for one? The definition that we have for fence, which is an actual structure. I don't believe that invisible fence is a structure. Second, what was the rationale for not allowing fences in the front yard. And I think that the rationale for that rule is, one of them was so that you can't have animals able to just run around in the front yard essentially unattended or, without a leash. And so I don't, and the third point is, I don't know how you're going to possibly regulate this, this invisible fence issue. How do you, is there an analog in the zoning code? How can you regulate something that you can't even see? I mean, how are you going to do it?
Well, it's going to be complaint-based, so we certainly, anybody can really do anything they want on their properties, and oftentimes they do it without many permits, even though we have a lot of permits. And then we have to act based on complaints, or if our code enforcement officers see that. In this case, because we do not have this regulation, as Commissioner Peters indicated, one can install an invisible pet fence right up against the lot line. Right now, they're permitted, and they're not required to get a permit, and therefore they can do it right up against the lot line, and then it becomes a safety issue for both the pets and pedestrians. If, however, somebody calls in and inquires, for example, do I need a permit for an invisible pet fence, we can tell them, yes, you do. And there's actually a 6-foot setback from the lot line abutting a right-of-way. Then we have, even if it's one person, that we've achieved that. If somebody goes and installs it, and they don't ask for a permit, there's nothing we can do about it. If there's never any conflict, we will never know, and nothing will ever happen, and this ordinance will not have any effect on that property owner.
And does an electric fence, I know the dog wears something, so it
Right, so if they take
the animal from...
Right, if they take that collar off, then it has no effect. So there's only so much we can regulate. We fully understand that. The idea is to have something that we can fall back on. And just to answer your question in regards to why there was a requirement for no fences in front yards, I believe that's been around ever since the beginning of Evanston. And from just reading the comprehensive general plan, the idea was to have an open feeling, open sort of look to the streets and neighborhoods. And maybe Commissioner Peters can add to the previous zoning board of appeals meetings where public would be opposed to something in the front yard. I think there's just general feel for openness, and that was the reason for it.
So this issue would really only come up if someone were to install an invisible fence and say they didn't install it within the requirements of the proposed regulation, and then subsequently if there's an incident and that incident leads to the discovery of a non-compliant invisible fence, then that person, you're saying that what the rule would allow for is Evanston to say, well, hey, we discover that your fence is not in compliance, you're going to have to bring it into compliance. And then we hope that another incident doesn't happen. And if it does and they're not in compliance, so I guess, is there a penalty for non-compliance? For the discovery of non-compliance?
Like any other, I think, zoning violation, there are different fees and penalties. I mean, oftentimes there's a warning for the first one, and the second one there's a court citation, then it goes to court, et cetera. I think it really depends.
Okay.
Lori, you've got a microphone.
Thank you, Lori Pearson, Planning and Zoning Administrator. Likely what we would do in that case is request that they get a permit that shows it in the compliant location, pay the $45 permit fee, and call it a day. If that didn't work, of course, there are enforcement mechanisms, but we always prefer compliance over going through that other process.
Yeah.
Are there other provisions in the zoning ordinance that have this same solely complaint-based quality to them? This one seems kind of only semi-regulatory, and I wonder if we're creating a new category of things in the zoning ordinance, or are there other aspects of zoning that we say, this is what we want, and if we catch you at it, we'll fine you?
There's many instances. If you think about when we regulate impervious surface, somebody can put up a shed in their backyard without obtaining a permit and increase their impervious surface, and there's no way for us of knowing that. Unless there's a complaint about it, then we can go and try to enforce it, et cetera. Same thing with fowl, with chickens. We do allow them, but there are rules in terms of setbacks from the lot lines. So unless somebody comes in and asks about it, we just have no way of knowing unless somebody complains in their neighborhood, there's chickens running around the backyard, and then we have to send somebody to measure the setbacks, et cetera.
Okay, Commissioner Lewis, then Commissioner Peters.
Bed and breakfasts. Bed and breakfasts.
Here.
Okay, I would just like to say, first of all, I'm kind of surprised that I'm kind of turning like this, but we live in a time where technology is changing the definition of practically everything, we do, our institutions and everything, and I think invisible fences, even though they're it's a marketing name or something, does provide many of the functions of what we call a fence. I mean, it does stop, it does limit things. It's so, in very many ways, I think it does fulfill that function. So I would suggest that to be progressive, we may strongly consider, extending the definition to that point. So.
Are we exhausted?
Exhausted.
All right, then, somebody offer a motion on this one. I think my understanding is the staff would like us to send this to council with something rather than keep it here. So I will entertain a motion to send it with a positive recommendation or a motion to send it with a negative recommendation. Peter's light went on, so he's got the motion.
I move we send this with a positive recommendation and that the recommendation includes the suggestion that a definition for invisible fence be provided. It's in the ordinance.
Well, I think it is in the draft ordinance, isn't it?
It's in there.
Okay. All right, you've heard the motion. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Commissioner Peters? Aye. Commissioner Goddard?
Aye.
Commissioner Asaro?
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin?
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis?
I guess.
Commissioner Scher? Chairman Ford?
No.
The motion passes 5-2.
Thank you. Other business. The only other business that I know of is to remind you that the Rules Committee is meeting this Friday at 7:30 in the conference room up on 3 to discuss the proposed changes to the rules of procedure. Demir, do you have anything, staff reports, reminders, any of that?
The only one item I just want to point out, the plan development that was recommended for approval last month at 1571 Maple was initially targeted for Planning and Development Committee early February, but they've requested continuance, so that will be presented to the City Council or the Planning and Development Committee on March 9th for any of those that are interested. They're still working with staff on some of the public benefits, but we do feel confident that they will present something March 9th. So I think that's all I had.
Commissioner Newman.
Can you clarify the time of the rules and
Yes, it is at 7:30 a.m., not
AM.
p.m., a.m. in the morning.
Thank you.
Room 3106 on the 4th floor.
3106 on the 4th floor?
I'm sorry, 3rd floor. Thank you.
Whose light is that? Sorrow.
I just have a question. Are we having a meeting? No questions about the prior matter. Are we having a meeting next month? Plan Commission?
There, most likely, yes. There's going to be at least one plan development on the agenda at 1620 Central. It's not, I guess, 100% at this point, but it's tentative very strongly, yes.
And so far, that's the only thing that
As of
might
right
be-
now, yes.
And then when does my term end?
I'll have to,
The only reason I'm asking, because I wanted to publicly say, well, I'm going to take this opportunity now just in case, because I think it's up in March, right?
I believe it's March 23rd, and I will check that and
We
we'll get back to
once
you.
more.
March 23rd,
Correct. So I believe you are,
one more month. Yeah.
Correct. So the meeting will be March 11th, so you will be eligible to be at the meeting.
Okay. Well, if there isn't a meeting, I want to take the opportunity to say thank you to all of you, because we don't know if there's going to be a meeting, so I don't want to lose the opportunity. I want to thank each and every one of you. It has been a pleasure to serve with you, to work with you, to learn from each and every one of you. I've gotten more than what I've contributed to this commission, and I sincerely have enjoyed my time on it with all of you. And I also want to commend the staff for their hard work. There's a lot that goes into what you do, and as an Evanstonian, whether staff resides here or not, I sincerely appreciate all that you do, not only for this commission, but for this great city. So I want to thank everybody, and I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you. And all the best to the continuing members, to our new chairman, to our preceding chairman. I've thoroughly enjoyed our coffees. I've thoroughly enjoyed learning so much from you, and I will definitely miss you guys. And my kids will miss seeing me on TV. They think I'm famous.
I would join in Commissioner Assaro's comments, except as they refer to me. I, too, will be going off the commission, and it's been terrific. I thank the staff, and I thank the other commissioners.
And we thank you both. Those of us who came on after you have learned a great deal by listening to you and watching you. Does the public have anything she wishes to say to us?
There's one more.
You have an agenda item all to yourself now. Well, okay, that being the case, if there is nothing more to come before us, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Seconded. Peters seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you, staff.